Hey, this is Pete Saronis, CEO and founder of Dots and Bridges, former Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Energy and Education, where I spent 25 awesome years, and for the last 6 have been building this company to be one that is what we're about to do today: connect some dots, build some bridges, inform, enlighten, educate, whatever the verb is, so that we can, as a community, understand the significance that technology is having on our world, in our life, and how it's impacting humanity. My guests today are Charlie Harry, Dr. Charlie Harry, for those that you, of course, know him, Director of Operations for, let me see if I get this right. No, correct me. I'm correcting myself. Director for the Center for the Governance of Technology and Systems at the University of Maryland, the CEO and co-founder of Decision Point Analytics, and an Associate Research Professor at, again, College Park and the University of Maryland. Welcome, Charlie.
Great, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
You got it, buddy. Yeah, and congrats on that latest title of yours. That's what an accomplishment, and so well deserved.
Oh, thank you very much.
You bet, pal. And we're looking forward to just hearing your perspective contextually on this whole critical infrastructure focus. Our other guest is the great Tony Vicinelli, Chief Technology Officer Federal at Enlight Software. Tony, first, welcome. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, you too, Pete. Thank you.
You bet, pal. And I appreciate you having this platform for us to kind of dive into something that for many is a technical discussion, but your vision, your passion for this critical infrastructure discussion, the role that the data center, as we're building through these episodes, is playing in terms of organizational road mapping and understanding that is arguably the most critical piece of the said infrastructure. So welcome to you both. And for our audience, again, we hope you take something away from today that piques that curiosity. I have introduced our guests, and I don't read bios or pedigrees, but I'm gonna now ask, let's start with Charlie here. Charlie, why don't you fill in a little bit of the personal and professional journey that you have been on, and why this topic is so relevant to you, not so much as this incredible advisor and academic, but also for the greater good in our country.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this episode. The way I was kind of, like to describe my background is really eclectic. I was really trained as an economist of all things, and worked in international trade, and then for some strange reason took a little bit of a detour and ended up in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community for about 20 years, working a lot of the nation's most pressing national security challenges, and spending roughly 15 of those years working on the issue of cybersecurity, going all the way back to the early aughts, and really trying to get my arms around not just the technical elements of the problem, but more importantly, the organizational challenges that it poses. After leaving the intelligence community, I spent quite a bit of time as a consultant, and then later came to the University of Maryland as a scholar practitioner, really focused on some of what I saw to be really some of the core challenges in the field, which were not just the technology. I mean, the technology is foundational, but really organizationally, how do people and organizations try to manage a really complex set of problems? And so the center that I'm now leading, the Center for Governance of Technology and Systems, is really about how do you, imbue governance in all this complexity with all this technology and people and processes? How do you actually bring it together and try to manage it? And so my real areas of concern are broadly not just in organizations, but across society. And how do you manage strategic risk being posed from various forms of cyber attack? And we've seen really, really clear examples over even just the last few months with the attacks on Colonial Pipeline. We've seen attacks on JBS meat processing, and certainly some of the ongoing challenges associated with vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange. So there are lots of very specific examples just in the near term that we can point to. And certainly going back 10 years, you've seen an escalation in not just the scope, but also the cadence of these attacks. They're getting more disruptive, and organizations really, really need to be prepared. And it's not just about the technology, it's about how you try to create a governance structure around that.
Yeah, Charlie, I'm going to unpack a little bit because I was taking a few notes here. And I think as we pivot over to Tony, and it's going to be the same question for you, my friend, this idea of critical infrastructure, and it's whether it's mitigating or managing risk, conducting the right diligence around technology, investment, if you will. I mean, you deal a lot, Tony, with the federal government and, separating yourself a bit from the pack because every product and solution has a unique characteristic or two. But the organizational responsibility that Charlie, you addressed, I think is so overlooked in terms of what a technology tool can do for the C-level to the folks working in a data center, for example, and the information needed at the ready to make judicious decisions and again, mitigate that risk to the environment. So thank you for those opening remarks, and we'll come back and dive a bit into some of that. Tony, the floor is yours. Passion, purpose, and just why this topic is so relevant to you, and especially in the direction that Nlyte Software is heading.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've been at Nlyte Software for 7 years, and I've seen a number of changes happen in the industry, and I've seen those changes come through the questions that I'm being asked by customers. Right. So initially, right, our tool was really, we would get a lot of questions and people needing problems solved as far as, very specific things, right, within the data center. Help me manage my racks and of equipment and where they are. I'm using Excel spreadsheets or kind of manual processes there. And what Charlie had said really resonated with me, which was the problem is becoming so complex. It needs to have people with automation, people and processes with automation, and being able to ask questions of the data that they're gathering that helps them answer those questions to solve their problems. And so not only are we getting questions now from customers that are, can you tell me, can you help us with our asset integrity, where all of our assets are? Yes, we can do that. But can you help me with understanding with real-time power and how much cooling is available in the data center? Yes, we can help you with that. But it's really the cross relationship of the data that the real value of the analytics are coming out of the tool. And when more and more people are seeing those analytics, you mentioned organizational responsibility. All of a sudden now we're getting questions from different parts of the organizations that are interested in the data that weren't necessarily before. So it's not just the IT folks that are concerned with how is my critical infrastructure, right? And do I have enough space, power, and cooling in the data center? It's the mission owners of that application or of that workload that are saying, oh, is my application secure because I want to be able to deliver on my mission? How can you communicate that to me in data that says, oh yeah, we are going to be able to provide you with the critical infrastructure you need to support that critical application, because it's all dependent, right? I'm depending on you to deliver those infrastructure services to me. And so those are the more complex questions now that I've seen, we've gone down that maturity, curve to say, oh, it's not just about looking at racks of equipment. It's what's in those racks and what mission do they deliver on, and can you ensure that you can provide that foundational layer to me as a application owner, as a mission owner.
Yeah. Let me stay with you for a minute here, Tony, and maybe this can be something, Charlie, you can kind of riff off. Obviously, Nlyte in many circles, especially in the Beltway, is aligned with the Data Center Optimization Initiative and being a data center infrastructure management tool. I like to think of it more so, frankly, as you're growing this platform for any customer or to-be customer to use to kind of create that actionable applied intelligence. But there is an acronym that caught my eye, and we were talking leading up to this, the Integrated Data Center Management acronym. Can you distinguish between DCIM and IDCM for our audience?
Yeah, I can. I mean, DCIM is really one part of what IDCM would be. So really, there is a compute fabric, right? That people have now, right? Their applications and workloads are running across. They may be on-prem, they may be in a colo, they may be in the cloud, right? We need to be able to understand completely across that fabric about where those applications are and workloads are running, and what resources are needed to support them, and where may be the best place for those workloads to run. If there is a disruption of some kind, we want to make sure that we understand if there's a disruption in the cooling chain, for example. We want to understand and respond to not only that this piece of equipment, right, this server, this switch is affected, but what workloads and what applications are affected, what owners and people need to be contacted based off of that disruption in the physical world, right? So that's yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so if I may, it's like there's this day and age where it was be alerted, but
That's
what
right.
Nlyte software is doing, and again, I'm just, sort of taking it in myself, is being alerted is one thing, but then being alerted as to the impact to a business process, which, is run by people or is automated, is just another layer of that analytics focus, that lens that the Nlyte software application framework is.
It is, and something that I really took to heart, because I learned the lesson and I stole the words from Dr. Charlie, which are, what is the effect, right? What is the effect of the alert, right? And so that is something that I was like, oh yeah, that's what's the value on that alert that should be applied. And I'm sure he can talk to about it.
Well, that was a great segue and unplanned to our audience about this concept of a tapestry that's woven through an organization. And that's intentional. And Dr. Charlie will talk about that, maybe wearing his decision point hat. But Charlie, in addition to maybe taking some of what Tony was discussing in terms of capability and applying that to, we have a cyber executive order that came out in May that was using terms like information technology and running the vital machinery with operational technology, and of course mitigating risk. There's a lot to think about, right? When you're addressing cybersecurity, when really it's security, network, physical, cyber. So can you comment a little bit on this critical infrastructure as a focus area?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that, people have been really thinking about deliberately in the information security space, really going all the way back to the Clinton administration. When you take a look at a lot of the kind of evolution of executive orders, throughout the, administrations of both political parties, there's been actually quite a bit of continuity in how administrations are looking at this problem. What has evolved is the level of complexity that even the executive branch is having to deal with, because it's not enough just to say, well, we need to be worried about critical infrastructure. And it's not enough just to say, well, there are 16 different sectors of critical infrastructure. But now we're starting to get into very, very deliberate and deeper discussions about, well, what type of technologies, whether it's IT or OT, how are they integrated? How do they all work together in order to form these kind of core processes? Because what is, I think a lot of the thinking on this has changed, where it used to be where you only had to think about what people would call their crown jewels, right? I create a spreadsheet, I've got my 25 key systems that I want to make sure that are up and operating. And when you only think of the problem in that way, you get very blinded. You very much start focusing on just a handful of things, and you lose sight that everything actually is working in a broader system, right? So it's not just about that one application server. It's connected to things, via routers and switches, and eventually make their way to OT infrastructure, right? Through the PLC controllers, RTU units, all of these things matter, and they work together in an integrated set of systems. Some of those are going to reside in the cloud. Some of those are going to reside on-prem. Some of those are going to exist out in the field. And guess what? They all utilize the internet as the core backbone communicating, but your core systems might actually be in the data center, co-located, right? So that opens up the attack surface dramatically, for attackers, right? So back in the day, when I used to play offense, this is the way we would think, right? So you need to really deeply understand how everything is kind of put together and understand that you are in fact dealing with a pretty large attack surface that has to be managed holistically. That is really the name of the game. And so when you look at some of the latest executive orders, they're talking about very deliberate elements of this attack surface. It's not just about IT and OT. It's about the supply chain that's feeding it, right? It's about your third-party data vendors that are providing you core services, right? It's where you're co-located in a data center, who's managing the entire stack, right? And the reason is because there's vulnerabilities in each and every part of that layer, right? Each and every one of those layers and every part of that IT, OT, and intersection is potentially facing a set of vulnerabilities. So how do you manage that? How do you manage that overall set of complexity? And this gets to Pete's comment about a tapestry. And the reason we use that term is that a lot of the software that we've developed at Decision Point is really focused around trying to understand complexity. How do you model it? And frequently, what I'm finding when I talk to folks is that they're really, really struggling with that interface of technology, people, and process, right? And so how do you build in predictive analytics like Nlyte can bring in the data center and managing the physical all the way through the logical? And then how do you kind of bring it together to understand the processes that support the organization? What are the systems that support your manufacturing line? What are the systems that support your payroll? What are the systems that support your logistics, right? All of those things have to be mapped. And so instead of thinking of your network as one giant behemoth, it's better to break it up. Break it up into those core pieces, understand how they kind of work together like a set of Legos. And if you do that, then you can be better positioned to manage your defensive assets.
Yeah, great points. And Tony, I see you nodding because this is exactly what I feel like you described in terms of when you were using the phrase workloads or the term workloads, modeling the complexity. Folks, some of the references, Tony, I'm going to ask you to kind of maybe build off of what Tony mentioned, maybe highlight a few of those capabilities, because you mentioned, assets are one thing, but workloads and people and behaviors are another. And we'll get to that. But just for references, folks, going back to 2013, Executive Order 13636 on improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, 2013. Charlie and Tony have referenced what happened here on May 12th with the Executive Order 14028. I will offer folks, go take a look at the National Security Memorandum on Improving Cyber for Critical Infrastructure Control Systems, which came out in late July. So some great reading material in light of this conversation, but bringing it back to the data center, folks, a cloud is a place where somehow logically all this physical infrastructure connects, and there are many options out there. Tony, you're in the business of marketing to data center initiatives. You have software that makes the data center, run on steroids with so many rich analytics. Why don't you speak to some of those exciting capabilities in your roadmap, as well as what folks can take advantage of today?
Yeah, I mean, when we look at bringing solutions especially to our federal customers, right, we want to make sure that we are speaking the language of federal, right? The language that they understand results in, right? So we want to make sure we're reporting things as far as data center infrastructure, data center optimization initiative. We want to make sure that we're giving people the metrics in that and reporting and output in that language. But then also understanding some of the other constraints some of the other obligations that they have as far as mandates are concerned. So where your assets are for asset integrity management. And Charlie was touching on this. The understanding of a system, what does a system mean, right? And all the components along the way that make up that system. And that's different than ownership, and it's different than where it is, right? It can live across many things. And so with the extension and openness of the API that Enlight has. At first, it was, maybe years ago, someone asked me, do you guys have an API? I'd be able to say, oh yeah, we have an API. You can integrate with it. And experience has taught me we should ask, like, well, why do you want to integrate with it, and what do you want to do with it? And the answers that come back, or the questions and answers that come back, are very interesting, because people want to be able to ask Enlight about, like it's a data center OS almost, right? It's an operating system that is all knowing, and it's the consciousness of the data center, where I want to ask you questions about what, I have an outage here. How is that affecting a system? How is that affecting my cooling capacity? What is the return on investment for the IT dollar that I've spent? All of those things, right? We want to be able to enable people to ask those questions of Enlight. And I feel like for our customers, there are more and more parts of the organization that are being tasked with getting that data. There was 7 years ago, we were never really approached or asked, questions from CFOs. Now CFOs want to know the data center is a business line, right? They want to know, if I spend $1 towards my IT bill or to my data center, what do I get back for that? Or is it well spent to mitigate risk in some way, right? So those are some of the things that I try to understand from our customer standpoint. And the federal folks have a whole nother layer on it, right? As far as regulatory and compliance, that we also try to make sure that we have our ears open and listen to.
Yeah, I'm going to just build off of that and say, when I think of the platform, you used a lot of terminology that's synonymous with why artificial intelligence, machine learning, leveraging automation to inform resilient communications comes to mind. And I know you've used that in the past, Tony. I think that eloquently captures that, it could be viewed as something we have to buy, but some of what, Charlie, you referenced in terms of, managing risk, mitigating risk, understanding behaviors, OT and IT are different types of data sets, one could absolutely state. And it's why with this integration of the two, we've seen what's happened in this world with Colonial and Katrina and the recent floods and fires that seem to be happening. Technology can be an enabler for what can we learn and do differently next time. So I think that there's a very important emphasis, in addition to the great work that you're leading and sharing in terms of how Enlight can help customers think of, what's edge computing, zero trust, compliance. I think it's a great reflection that you have a plan in this roadmap. And maybe in our next and final segment, we'll talk about what's coming, Tony, in terms of what will allow organizations, government, or industry to get excited about just being able to make those decisions quickly. So let's pivot back to Charlie for a New York minute or two here. Charlie, with all of the references to executive orders, you do a lot of work with students, and you're a educator. This 21st century workforce comes up a lot, and the government, for example, is big on reskilling, retaining, and recruiting. What are some of the students in your classroom, or those that are in the organizational workforce today? What are some of the topics that are being discussed that lend itself to companies needing to mature their applications and so forth?
Well, this is a great question. So I teach a lot of different courses, but I teach a few courses specifically in this area of cyber policy, which is really not a great title of a class. In the way that I tend to organize my courses is around kind of a central problem in cybersecurity, at least the way I see it. When is a cybersecurity problem a private issue versus a public concern, right? When does it cross that boundary? Because it gets to this issue of interdependence of technology on society, right? So there are a lot of core systems that are managed by the private sector. Over 85% of all critical infrastructure in this country is actually controlled by the private sector, not by the government. And so there are decisions that are made by private organizations that can have a societal consequence if they fail. And so one of the things that I try to describe for the students in really the journey that we go on together is to provide them first a foundation to talk more deliberately about technology, because I get a lot of different students. I get students from computer science and engineering, but I get a lot of students from economics, political science, philosophy, English, public policy. So I really get a nice kind of a grouping of students. And the one thing that I found, even for my technical students, is that they oftentimes lack a general understanding of what the technology base is in modern society. So one of the things we do is we actually go through kind of a history of the development of the internet. And the reason that becomes important is for them to more deeply understand how many protocols that we rely on today that were developed in the late 1960s or the early 1970s with security problems baked in, right? How much of that infrastructure has evolved from basically a science experiment and really kind of led by DARPA, eventually into something that's being managed. It's $1 trillion industry, being led by the largest companies in the world. And so starting with just kind of a foundation of not just the history, but how the global telecommunications infrastructure works is absolutely key, because then when you start talking about issues of governance and you talk about issues of strategic impact that technology can have, they come at it from a better informed position. They understand how the packets move around the world. They understand the various tech stacks that are involved. They understand satellite technology, terrestrial microwave, fiber, right? The physical elements of the internet, but then they also understand the logical connections, the autonomous systems, right? Internet exchange points, and where all that physical infrastructure is brought together. They start to understand how all the tech starts to work together and how the governance structure is multifactorial. Some controlled by NGOs, some controlled by state governments in their own right, and then all of this being managed as a global utility. So they start to understand the sheer complexity of this beautiful thing that we've created called the internet. And from that, then you can start building in all these kind of more interesting questions. Who owns the data? What's the roles and responsibilities? How do you manage resiliency? If you're a state government, what is your roles and responsibility if you do not control the infrastructure? How do you incentivize companies? How do you work in some sort of collaborative governance structure? How do you incentivize those companies in order to do the right things? And all under, with them having the basic understanding that there are businesses that have to make money in order to survive, and understanding that you can't just dictate something, right? You can't just write a memo and just kind of, send it out from up on high and things are going to happen. The world is complicated and it's filled with incentive structures. And so you have to understand those incentive structures, understand how things work before you can even begin to talk about how you're going to govern it, right? So that is really at the heart of what I try to train our undergraduates to think. And then we can then go into deeper conversations about very specific issues, whether it's privacy, whether it's critical infrastructure protection, whether it's what are the roles and uses of offensive cyber, whether it's for fighting terrorism or taking care of propaganda campaigns. So that's a lot of how I'm trying to at least impart upon the next generation a deeper understanding of how technology really impacts society. So it's less of an engineering type course, and it's much more of a deeper understanding of how technology is really, foundational for the entire 21st century, right? There is not a single sector in our economy that is not touched by technology.
And I would thank you. And I would offer that the data center is where it kind of all comes to and goes out, and the ping, the power, the pipe that I like to talk to. Tony, you're nodding your head. You want to comment on some of Charlie's comments?
Well, no, whenever when we start to read the memos that are put out by the government, what you're noticing is just much more detail, much more direction, or intended direction of where people need to go. Before, FSMA was just like, security is important. information security is important. Now it's like very direct and directed into, addressing some of the problems that we're seeing in the world, and calling to mind, these are things that are affecting the kinetic world around us, right? Things that are actually information, cyber attacks that are actually affecting the physical world. And so we'll see what happens over the next couple of years, but I would suspect that the trend continues. You see more and more. And yeah, go ahead, Pete. I'm sorry.
No. I'm just, a question came to mind that I want to ask from your side of the fence too, which is in light of your references to government compliance, acts, laws, bills, executive orders. It's a lot to consume. And here you are as a chief technology officer. Obviously, nLight Software has a commercial practice and you're selling into the government sector. And I always like to think of it as not sell and buy or buy and sell, but more seek and solve, solve and seek. Can you, in any way, shape or form, you're in so many conversations, there's a partnership, open government, being participatory and collaborative. How has the conversation shifted in light of this remote working? Is it harder to engage with federal agencies? What could be done to amplify the conversation, being in a situation where we don't get to go press that flesh? I mean, what's it like articulating a company's value when you don't get to meet with many folks?
Man, that's a great question. I was really, pleasantly surprised how quickly the government was able to pivot and respond in this sort of, remote work environment. Many, using Zoom or using GoToMeeting or something like that. It seemed like everyone took to it pretty easy. From a day-to-day meeting, keeping up to date, getting through tasks, all of those things. There is really, I've noticed, like, as things were opening up and you're able to go and meet with people more, you were reminded of this importance of actually meeting people face to face, because sometimes they do feel more comfortable to impart some of the problems that they're having, as opposed to just, opening up over, a conference call where there's a lot of other people, maybe involved. Because whenever folks are having problems, right, there is for them to express that to you, they have to trust that you understand, right? Because there's a vulnerability there, I think, sometimes where, not a software vulnerability, but like a vulnerability in that, I have a problem that I need to get fixed. I need to feel like you can help me with it. Let me tell you about it. That doesn't always happen. That connection doesn't always happen over Zoom. And I don't think that's necessarily a federal problem, right? That's just an everybody problem. I think that sometimes that we have to open up and communicate that way over these sort of remote solutions. But the actual implementation of the federal government using Teams and Zoom and those sort of things, it's been adapted well, and I think a really efficient use of time. A lot of times, if you sometimes are trying to do some of the meetings where you would have to go through security in a federal building, it's like 50% of it takes 25 minutes to get in, 25 minutes to get out. Now we can have meeting and get it all done, and people can move on to the next task.
Well, and again, all the more reason for, being a consultant, whatever people call me, an advisor. I find that this type of environment, the ability to articulate and illustrate what you do in spades, obviously you as well, Charlie, to convey the value of what nLight Software can deliver as folks are looking to comply with federal guidance and regulation, but also, as I like to say, address the art of the possible. Because even in those face-to-faces, you're usually limited by time. And I think it's a testament to you and all the talking and speaking you do around the Beltway, Tony, to just continuously build the brand of nLight. And I think it's well done. So thank you. Just to get that perspective. So, all right, let's go to my favorite part, the parting shots. I'm going to start with Charlie, and then we'll close out with Tony. And Charlie, this discussion is ongoing. We may do another one of these, but critical infrastructure and resilience and security, there's a lot, as I've said, to unpack. What would you take away from today, and what would you encourage our audience to take home with them?
Yeah, so this issue of critical infrastructure obviously is it's been around for a while, but it's gotten a lot of play most recently because of some of these high-profile attacks. The themes that I would emphasize are this issue of increasing convergence of kind of the IT and the physical systems. So IT/OT integration, and in some industries it's been here for a while. In other industries, it's fairly new. But idea of kind of this integration is one area that people need to be very mindful of because it opens up a broader attack surface. So instead of only having to worry about kind of physical attacks from insiders or from someone outside the fence line, now you got to worry about kind of this digital domain that potentially can have a real physical consequence. The other is kind of consolidation in the data center, right? So data centers have demonstrated an incredible economic value to businesses and organizations all around the world, right? There are huge benefits, both in terms of kind of uptime as well as dollars spent, and just really kind of procuring baseline security. There are huge advantages. Now, one of the downsides is that there's a lot of kind of co-location with other organizations, a lot of consolidation in single buildings. So you need to be a little bit more mindful of that, as you're building out your architecture. And it's not to say that it's a bad idea. In fact, I would argue it's the opposite. It's just you need to be mindful that you are now kind of expanding your footprint potentially more broadly, and that just opens up the potential attack surface against the process, right? Just I'm emphasizing rather than a specific asset, it's the process that you're protecting, this integrated set of systems all working together to basically support your core business. And understanding that and investing in that to manage risk is really at the heart of really delivering on this promise that all this technology can bring to bear.
Yeah, I'm going to say before I come over to Tony, just you used a word that is so understood or well understood, but I think when people really think about it, architecture. You referenced Enterprise Architecture 101, Charlie. People, process, and technology. Architect, invest, and then implement. Too often we go buy something because it's the shiny penny. We plug it in and we hope it works. So thank you for just underpinning for all the enterprise architects out there who feel like they're just not referenced enough or being told, yeah, they make really pretty charts, but we just need to know what to buy. I think that's what we've been cementing today, and having the analytics to make sure that we've made good investments is something that, Tony, you highlighted. So that kind of was my little parting shot to Charlie's. Tony, what's your parting shot?
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback off of what Charlie said and what we've talked about in the past, it's understanding the effect of what not only was a difficult problem before of a potential outage or some disruption within your data center. Now we have to look at the potential for a purposeful disruption that may happen in the data center, and I don't know if that was something that was necessarily considered before, but needs to be considered now. And so being able to understand that even before the fact, right? Being able to be alerted that something is going wrong is good. But be able to understand that before the fact and understand how all of those systems are interrelated and potentially weighted. We like to be able to help our customers with that and be able to make it as easy as possible and integrate as much data as possible into our platform. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take a parting shot from yours, and just in Pete speak, maybe this hopefully resonates, that, what all that Nlyte does with analytics and being an engine for that intelligence to be gleaned. Charlie, you spoke to the threat landscape. I think what I heard is, and I think we know the symbiotic relationship. If data is the new oil, right? In order to mitigate risk, and if you do that, you will absolutely drive revenue. And if you flip that around and don't consider what could happen because you don't see it, it hasn't happened yet. When it does, then obviously that has an impact on revenue and reputational damage. So, hey, I want to thank you both. You're both phenomenal thought leaders. I mean, themes that came away today were, know your data center, have a strategy for OT, IT, cyber resilience, workforce enablement, be it remote or on site, leveraging the cloud or some version of the cloud is no doubt significant. Having trusted partnerships is key, but folks, the data center is critical infrastructure, and we will continue to pound that into anybody who's willing to listen and invest with the right tools and the right methodologies. And I think Decision Point, Charlie Harry, and like Tony Vicinelli are two awesome individuals who could help you or shed some light on that goal. So thanks, fellas, for seeing you, and I hope for seeing you and hope to see you again soon.
All right, thanks a lot.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys.